Could you explain why IVF might be considered unethical for Christians, and what biblical or theological principles support this view? Additionally, how should Christians navigate the deep desire for children in a way that respects the sanctity of life and stays faithful to Christian ethics and presuppositions?
I want to thank you for that question, brother. I always brace myself when someone says, "and further." Because that is often when looking into the Grand Canyon, you feel that push, and the next thing you know, you're over. But no, that was very consistent, and I appreciate that. This is an issue that has all of a sudden troubled some Christians in a way it hadn't troubled them before, and some Christians are curious as to why this would be an issue of Christian conscience at all. Okay, so I'm going to try to take like 20 centuries of Christian thought and distill it down. First of all, I'm going to start with where that question ended after the furthermore. And that is that the Christian worldview says that for a married couple, a husband and a wife, the desire for a child is absolutely good and absolutely right, period. Okay? So the desire for a child is what the Creator put into the hearts of his creatures, and the way that is to happen is in the holy covenant of marriage, a man and a woman coming together in the union of marriage, and normally babies result. Every single one of them is to be received as God's gift and celebrated and welcomed, nurtured, treasured, every single one of them. That does raise the issue of what happens when, through just a normal marital life, the child does not come. And I say that my wife and I had that struggle for some time. The answer is that throughout most of Christian history, what you did was pray, because there wasn't anything else you could do. Well, there is a medical knowledge now, there's a physiological knowledge now, and there are some mechanisms now that can allow, and here I'm going to speak very carefully, a married couple, to increase their chances of having a baby. The problem comes when this is a Christian theological category. I think it will help you, but you're going to have to think with me for a moment. When God gives us goods, here's one of the principles of the Christian worldview. When God gives us goods, the goods have to cohere in their proper context. And you're thinking, how does that work? It means that marriage comes with certain goods, and those goods aren't goods outside of marriage. So sexual expression is one of them. In other words, God gives you a whole, He gives us a good, He gives us a context for these goods, and they hold together, and you try to take it out of that, and you turn something undeniably good into something that is now wrong. Well, when you talk about, say, modern reproductive technologies, Christians have to be very concerned when that technology is now abstracted from the marital union. Okay, so let me just talk about IVF for a moment. You know, and when people first started talking about IVF, they were talking on that's in vitro fertilization, which means test tube. That's an anachronistic term. It generally doesn't involve test tubes anymore, but that's stuck. IVF, in vitro, which means in glass, literally, in vitro fertilization. And at the very least, we just have to think about this. We're abstracting from the marital union, okay? So, in other words, the sperm and the egg are not coming together within the context of the marital union. But at least when this began, you were talking about the sperm and the egg coming from a married couple. All right? And the miracle was that some fertilized embryo could be transferred into the woman's womb and then be welcomed as a healthy born infant. Okay, so at the time, a lot of Christians did not see the problem of abstraction because it was only in the context of a married couple and with the transfer of any successful embryo with the hope that it would be received. But let me tell you what happens with the abstraction. What happens is now you can have a gay male couple, or you can have a single person, or you can have a lesbian couple who can go, and now, because of in vitro fertilization, they can even look at a catalog, go to a website, they can purchase whatever cells they need, they can go to whatever clinic is willing to treat them, they can hire a surrogate mother in the Ukraine, And this was when the war started, when Russia invaded Ukraine. You may recall that one of the issues that came to mind was there were so many surrogate mothers whose clients were American wealthy couples or individuals. And the question was, how do we work all this out? Well, this is where the Christian worldview says, wait just a minute. If you abstract something, you've already created moral danger. So I want to be careful to say what I haven't said. I haven't said that it is sin for a Christian couple to use in vitro fertilization, period. I'm going to say it's morally dangerous. Okay, so it's morally dangerous because there's an abstraction. All right, but there are other problems now with in vitro fertilization, and that is, as it is currently conducted, it is most often conducted in a situation in which more embryos are created. I'll use the word created just because it's the word used in the literature. More embryos are created than will ever be transferred into the mother's womb. Second thing is, it's basically now complete without reference to marriage at all. And so now we got a problem, and then not only that, you're having embryo sorting, which is considered just standard medical practice some is an understatement here. It's considered basically standard medical practice increasingly that you want to choose the healthiest embryos rather than the ones that are not judged to be so healthy. And we know that at least in some places, even as there is a catalog sorting of the source, like blue eyes and blonde hair, we're not a long way from sorting on the basis of anticipated athletic ability or cognitive ability. So I want to say, I think it is sin for Christians to be engaged in anything that creates human lives that are never going to be anything other than frozen or destroyed. I think that's, from a Christian worldview perspective, just wrong. So that means that however a Christian married couple may be considering this, they would have to do everything to decrease risk, that moral risk. And here's the thing, a lot of medical practices won't accept a Christian couple on that basis because it can cut down on their success percentage. So this is one of the problems of life in a complex biomedical age. Modern reproductive technologies present a lot of the most excruciating of these issues. I will simply say that I have written on this for 30 years, so I didn't just start talking about this when it hit the headlines in recent months. I've been writing book projects on this for 30 years. And the thing is that when I first began this, there weren't that many evangelical Christians talking about it. I will tell you, it is now one of the issues in which I get more contact from pastors and Christians, and that tells me that it's a very common struggle. And I just want to say to Christian couples, you're not wrong earnestly to desire a child. On the other hand, you know right up front that there would be ways, according to the language of the world, of having a baby that would not be acceptable. And I just think Christians together, and by this I don't mean from the platform like this, but Christians in conversation, in the context of a faithful church together, praying for one another and thinking these things through, are likely to come to far more godly conclusions. And that also means that we never take for granted that the couple sitting next to us is not struggling with this issue. We should never take for granted that we should not be praying for couples in our church who we know are struggling, or some we just need to pray, even not even knowing if they're in this struggle. And it means that every time a baby's born, we're the people who celebrate every single baby as God's gift. And I had a friend when I was in junior high school, that's what it was called then, middle school now, I had a friend who was 13 years younger than his brother, and his middle name was Surprise. And what a great gift. What a wonderful, wonderful gift. One of the things I say is that you're in a gospel-centered church and you're not in a church which is sold out to theological liberalism, because if you need a nursery and increased space for the youth group, something gospel-centered is going on. So let's be thankful for that. Thank you for the question.